Hello and welcome to another spiritual learning video. Today we're going to go over Tibetan spiritual practices, the magic and the supernatural within Tibetan Buddhism. Let's get started. The religious practices found in the Tibetan cultural world, accepted by and even conducted by the monastic orders, include the incantation of mystics, magical formulas, the exorcism and destruction of demons, divination, oracles, and symbolic sacrifices, aspects associated with shamanism. It is this element within Tibetan Buddhism of magic and the supernatural, so remote from the original teachings and practices of Buddhism, that it has led to its designation as Lamaism, as if it were a separate religion or at least a separate offshoot of the original faith. In attempting to account for these apparent contradictions, scholars have sought to identify the source of these seeming divergence from what can be claimed as the pure original Buddhist teachings. Buddhism was a foreign import to Tibet, but Tibet made Buddhism its own, and that encompassing system of beliefs and practices known as Tibetan Buddhism can only be understood in the full context of the country, its history, its society, and its indigenous religions and cultural practices. At the core of Buddhist teachings are the Four Noble Truths, explaining the nature and cause of suffering and the way to enlightenment. A focused approach that makes no mention of a creator and that seems in our contemporary world more a philosophy, a perspective on reality, and a guide to living than a religion. Yet, although Tibetan Buddhism is based on those core teachings, it includes practices that extend into the supernatural realm, such as defense against evil spirits. Thus, the religion seems almost split into two paradoxical fractions: the spiritual path to enlightenment and rituals of protection against the hosts of evil. And although the original teachings of the Buddha do not mention a creator or other divinities, Tibetan Buddhism embraces a vast plethora of divinities. These supernatural beings derive from the intersection of many sources and influences, both native and external. Only a general survey of this complex subject can be given here. The concept of karma is fundamental to Buddhism. It is based on the premise of the unwavering relationship of cause and effect. In the familiar Western term, you reap what you have sown. Your own actions, rather than the decision of the divine beings who sit in judgment of, or the intercession of any god, determine what will become of you. Buddhism was transmitted to Tibet mainly during the 7th to 10th centuries. And by the 14th century, the Tibetans had succeeded in translating all available Buddhist literature in India and Tibet. Tibet has 3 different religions: Tibetan Buddhism, which includes practices such as offerings to statues, attending ceremonies, and chanting by monks. Tibetan folk religion includes indigenous beliefs and practices that predate Buddhism. These practices are often concerned with spirits and demons and are intended to bring benefits such as protection from harm, good crops, and wealth. Third is Bon. This includes ancient elements that predate Buddhism, such as fortune and ransom rituals. There are 2 main branches of Bon: Eternal Bon, which was developed from the 8th to the 11th century, and the New Bon, which was developed in the 14th century and includes elements from the original Bon and Tibetan Buddhism. But some people in Tibet actually practice other religions, including Chinese folk religion, Islam, and Christianity. Tibetan spiritual practices include mantras, prayer flags, Bodhisattva path, rituals and ceremonies, Noble Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, meditation exercises, and Tantric, which is a Tibetan yoga. In the second half of the 20th century, Tibetan Buddhism spread to the West, particularly after the takeover of Tibet to Chinese communist rule. That sent many refugees, including highly regarded reincarnated lamas, or tulkus, out of their homeland. Tibetan religious groups in the West included both communities of refugees and those consisting largely of Westerners drawn to Tibetan traditions. Tibetan shamanism is a combination of shamanic techniques and indigenous beliefs, cults, and rites that have been practiced in Tibet for centuries. Tibetan shamanism may have roots in the indigenous Bon religion, which was practiced in Tibet before Buddhism was introduced in the 8th century. Bon's original features were largely magical, involving the appeasement of demonic forces and blood sacrifices. Some say shamanism is the root of Bon, and that the Bon's absorption into Buddhism gave Tibetan Buddhism much of its distinct character. Bon was practiced by the Bon Po people for centuries before the growth of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is a branch of Vajrayana Buddhism. That Buddhism evolved in Tibet in the 7th century. Tibetan Buddhism includes rituals, spiritual practices, and supernatural beings, such as gods, spirits, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. Some say that Tibetan Buddhism's sophisticated shamanic practices are Tibet's most important contribution to humanity. For example, lamas are believed to communicate with spirits and function as shamans. Tibetan folk religion also uses shamanic techniques to promote health and long life, and to achieve the desirable incarnation in the next life. Shamanic treatments can include sucking illnesses out of the body, soul retrieval ceremonies, and rituals to end misfortune. Mantras are recited and visualized during tantric sadhanas. Mantras are part of the highest tantric practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Prayer flags are used to spread goodwill and compassion throughout the universe. Prayer flags are sacred and should be treated with respect. The Bodhisattva path. The Tibetan tradition teaches of exceptional human beings, known as bodhisattvas, who choose to reincarnate to support humanity's spiritual evolution. Rituals and ceremonies are popular practices for families to invite monks and nuns to perform spiritual ceremonies for health, protection, and success. Noble Eightfold Path is a comprehensive guide for ethical conduct, mental development, and wisdom. The Eightfold Path consists of 8 interrelated factors. Tibetan Buddhists follow the 4 noble truths of the Buddha, which are that life is suffering. Suffering is caused by craving. Cessation from suffering is possible, and one can free themselves from suffering by following the Noble Eightfold Path. Tibetan yoga is a term used among Buddhists to describe a range of tantric meditation and pranayama practices. It is composed of 5 flowing movements that keep students on the move. Meditation exercise. The 5 Tibetan sequence rites is a part of Tibetan yoga and is believed to enhance meditation. The practice energizes the body and stimulates the chakras, which prepares the mind for meditation. Malas are used to help focus one's awareness and concentration during spiritual practice. Long malas opposed to the shorter wrist malas, have 108 beads. The summit or head bead is called the guru bead or the sumra. In Tibetan Buddhism, one mala constitutes 100 recitations of a mantra. Tibetans also use bowing, the social gesture that involves bending the head or body in the direction of another person or symbol. It could be a sign of respect, submission, salutation, shame, or greeting. Their traditions also include offerings. Buddhists may leave gifts as a mark of respect and reverence to the Buddha. They also use chanting in Tibet. Mantras are chanted in Sanskrit in order to preserve the original meaning and refrain from losing anything significant in translation. Tibetan Buddhism has many deities, including Buddhas, female deities, and protectors. These deities are often referred to as Buddhas, which means the awakened ones. These deities are believed to have been ordinary people in their past lives who transcended the ordinary through their realizations and meditations. Thank you for watching another spiritual learning video. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. And if you like this content, please check out our playlist, Spiritual Learning, for more. We'll see you next week.